Richard drove home with a satisfied smile, his hands firmly gripping the steering wheel. Today had been monumental for him. After years of hard work, he'd finally received the promotion he had been hoping for. The announcement had caught him off guard, and it felt like the perfect way to wrap up a long week. He was headed home earlier than usual, a little eager to share the good news with Kimberly. This promotion meant more than just a raise. It opened up new opportunities to help Kimberly get back on track with her career. She hadn't worked in nearly a year, and despite her efforts to find something, nothing had stuck. Richard was sure that the extra money would allow him to support her goals, perhaps even help her take a few courses to reignite her professional life. He thought of a way to make the moment special. He would surprise her with the news over a nice dinner, maybe at that cozy Italian restaurant they both loved. The staff there knew them by name, and he could already imagine her reaction when he told her. A soft chuckle escaped him as he imagined her surprised smile. As Richard pulled up to their modest home, excitement buzzed in the air. He parked the car swiftly, eager to get inside and see Kimberly. As he stepped into the house, he called her name but was met with only the quiet hum of conversation from the living room. It seemed a bit unusual, as Kimberly wasn't usually on the phone. Curiosity grew, and he walked down the hallway, ready to call out again. But something caught his attention. There, on the couch, sat Kimberly in her robe, her laptop on her lap. She didn't hear him come in. She was laughing softly, leaning slightly forward and tightening her robe, just as she noticed him standing in the doorway. "Kim, who are you talking to?" Richard asked, raising an eyebrow in surprise. Kimberly straightened up quickly, her expression a mixture of surprise and something else. Was it nervousness? "Oh, it's just an old friend," she stammered, her fingers hurriedly attempting to close the laptop screen. But in the process, Richard caught a fragment of a man's voice, calm, yet too friendly, saying, "See you soon, baby." "Wait, what? Who was that?" Richard asked, his voice filled with confusion. Kimberly's face turned red as she tried to brush it off with a wave. "Just a friend, Richard. Nothing important. He's an old acquaintance, that's all." She spoke casually, but something in her tone felt off, evasive even. Richard's heart began to race as he studied her, hoping for a simple explanation. "If he's just a friend, why did you cover up when you saw me?" he asked, the doubt creeping into his voice. Kimberly laughed nervously, pulling her robe tighter. "Richard, you're overthinking this. It's really nothing. Sometimes I need a bit more excitement like in the movies. A little drama. It's just a game, that's all." Richard felt a tightness in his chest, his mind reeling from her response. "A game? You think this is funny, Kim?" he asked, his voice shaking with disbelief. His stomach churned as he looked at her, unable to shake the feeling of dread building inside him. This wasn't the evening he'd envisioned when he left work, filled with pride over his promotion. He had expected warmth, celebration, not this scene. Kimberly laughing on the couch, her robe slipping off her shoulders like something from a bad romance drama. She sighed, flipping her hair over one shoulder and leaning back, crossing her arms. Her posture spoke volumes. Richard could sense she was about to say something he wouldn't like. "Richard, can't you see? I need more than this routine. You're working all day, and I'm left here, day after day, alone. I need excitement, passion. I want to feel like more than just your wife, waiting for your attention after you've had a long day." Anger flared in Richard's chest, and he clenched his fists. "Of course, I'm busy, Kimberly. I work to ensure we have a future. You're able to stay home, not worry about bills, and even figure out what career you want. All because I'm covering both of us. And now you're telling me that's not enough." His frustration was clear in his tone. Kimberly rolled her eyes, dismissing him with a smile. "Oh, Richard, you're making a big deal out of nothing. It was just a joke. I thought you'd find it a little funny." Richard's voice dropped, steady but stern. "Nothing? Is he your lover?" The question hit the air like a bomb, freezing them both in place. Kimberly let out a deep breath and shook her head. "Richard, don't be ridiculous. He's just a friend." "Then explain this." Richard gestured toward her robe, which, despite her efforts to pull it together, revealed that she was wearing nothing underneath. "Why are you sitting here, talking to this friend, dressed like that?" Kimberly shifted uncomfortably, tugging her robe tighter. A coy smile appeared on her face. "It's just an energy thing, Richard. I like when you get a little jealous. It makes me feel alive." Richard's brow furrowed as he tried to understand her words, but the confusion and frustration only grew. Richard couldn't believe what he was hearing. "Are you really comparing this to some kind of dramatic fantasy?" he asked, frustration rising in his chest. "You're acting like we're living in some TV show or novel about love triangles and pointless drama." Kimberly, however, seemed unfazed by his words. She looked at him with unexpected boldness, as if she wasn't bothered by his irritation. "What's so wrong with it, Richard?" she replied nonchalantly. "I just want something to break up the monotony, a little excitement, you know? That's the spark that keeps people connected, keeps things fresh." Richard's hands gripped his hips, his teeth clenched as he stared at her, a mix of disbelief and anger clouding his expression. "So you really think sneaking around with some other guy is going to fix our marriage? You honestly think that lying and hiding things from me will somehow bring tension that will make our relationship better?" Kimberly sighed, waving him off as if his concerns were trivial. "Richard, I don't think you understand. You're just exhausted, burned out from work. You're frustrated and looking for someone or something to blame. It's not as big a deal as you're making it." Richard let out a dry, bitter laugh. "Frustrated? No, Kimberly. I'm furious." His voice sharpened. "You're having an affair, aren't you? I can barely stand to think about what you've been doing with him when I'm at work, but what's worse is that you're risking everything for something as stupid as boredom. Have you even considered how ridiculous this is? You're willing to throw away our entire marriage for a thrill." At his words, Kimberly's demeanor shifted. Her eyes narrowed as she crossed her arms and her lips tightened into a deliberate, almost practiced expression of offense. "So, now you're accusing me of cheating?" she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. "I can't believe you'd think so little of me." Richard's patience was unraveling. His voice was low but controlled as he demanded, "Show me. Show me the messages, the calls, everything. If you're telling the truth about this so-called friend of yours, then there's nothing to hide, right? I want to see exactly what you've been up to while I'm out working to support us both." Kimberly flushed with anger, her playful demeanor completely gone. She yanked her laptop closer to her chest, her body stiffening. "No, Richard. I have a right to my privacy. There's something called boundaries, and I don't need you invading mine." Richard stood frozen for a moment, a knot of dread forming deep in his stomach. The tension in the room was palpable, but before either of them could say anything more, he turned on his heel and headed toward the bedroom. He moved quickly, pulling clothes out of drawers and carelessly stuffing them into a bag. His movements felt almost mechanical, as if he had already made up his mind. Kimberly's hurried footsteps echoed in the hallway behind him. "Richard, what are you doing?" Her voice quivered with a mix of confusion and nervousness. Without looking at her, he answered, "You want excitement, right? You want tension and drama? Fine. I'll give you all the emotions you're looking for." "What does that even mean?" she asked, her tone now laced with panic. "It means," Richard said, stopping to face her, "that you'll be living alone for a while to think about your actions. These little games you're playing don't belong in our marriage. They never did." Her face fell as she let out an exaggerated sigh, as if trying to downplay the seriousness of the situation. "Richard, come on. It was just a game. You're overreacting." He cut her off, his voice calm but firm. "No, Kimberly. What I'm taking seriously is our relationship. And it's clear I'm the only one who cares about it. I need some time to think about what's left of us. I refuse to be the fool in a marriage where my wife thinks it's okay to play these games behind my back." Kimberly's face crumpled as the weight of his words hit her. Her hands flew to her face and she began sobbing dramatically. "Please, Richard, don't do this. I was just trying to add some excitement." Richard wasn't moved by her tears. He zipped up his bag and swung it over his shoulder. "Excitement?" he scoffed. "Maybe you'll find that excitement in silence for a while. Think about what you really want, Kimberly. Because whatever this version of excitement is, it has no place in our marriage." Without another word, he pushed past her and walked out of the door. His footsteps echoed as they grew quieter, each step final, signaling the end of this chapter. Outside, the evening air hit him like a cold slap. He paused for a moment, breathing deeply, and felt the weight of everything settle in. The sound of the door closing behind him marked a turning point. Taking out his phone, he dialed a colleague, explaining the situation with minimal words. "Man, you can stay with me as long as you need," his colleague, Tom, responded without hesitation. "We've got a spare room." "No problem. Thanks, Tom." "I'll figure things out soon," Richard said, his voice filled with quiet gratitude. "I'll stay a couple of days." As he drove away, his mind was racing. He couldn't help but shake his head, trying to process everything that had happened. His life felt like it had just been torn apart. Kimberly had claimed that her little games were harmless, but if they were harmless, why was she so unwilling to be honest? What was the secrecy all about? In the days that followed, Richard blocked her number, unable to endure her constant, frantic calls and messages. Once Richard had settled into a rented room, he began looking for a lawyer, determined to understand his options. They didn't own much, no property or assets to divide. Although they'd been together for a few years, they hadn't built a real home or family. He was young enough to start over, and wiser now, if nothing else. If she wanted drama and excitement, he thought bitterly, she could figure out how to get it without him. For the first time in days, he felt a sense of calm. As months passed, the divorce process continued. Kimberly repeatedly tried to get in touch with him. She sent texts, called from unknown numbers, and even wrote heartfelt letters begging him to talk to her. But Richard remained distant, his mind and heart still reeling from her unexpected betrayal. Then, the day of the divorce trial arrived. Richard had expected a routine, procedural hearing, but when he entered the room, he saw Kimberly sitting there, her eyes scanning his face anxiously. As the trial progressed, she took the chance to speak to him directly. Her voice trembled, and her face was streaked with tears as she met his gaze. "Richard, please, is there any chance at all, that we can fix this?" she asked, desperation evident in her voice. "I know I messed up, but can't we try again?" Richard looked at her, his expression hard and resolute. "Kimberly, we've been through this already. I can't. I don't want to live with someone I can't trust. I don't want to spend every day wondering what kind of game I'll find when I get home. This isn't what I signed up for." Her tears came faster, and her voice became more frantic. "Richard, I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought it would be harmless. I never imagined it would come to this." "Well, it did," he replied, his voice steady, "and the damage is done. I can't have that kind of instability in my life anymore, Kimberly." He took a deep breath, looking at her one last time. "We're done." With those words, the divorce was finalized. Though the sting of betrayal lingered, Richard focused on his work, determined to rebuild his life on his own terms. Kimberly, on the other hand, found herself struggling. For the first time in years, she had to find a job, and the world she had once known felt foreign and difficult. The comfort of her days at home was replaced with the harsh reality of job interviews, rejection, and long hours of discouragement. A year passed, and Richard's life, though quieter, was stable and calm. He relished the peace and freedom from the uncertainty that Kimberly had once brought to their marriage. One evening, as he checked his emails, a subject line caught his attention. The sender was Kimberly. He almost deleted the email without opening it, but something held him back, perhaps a reluctant curiosity. It had been a year since he had ignored her calls and messages, but this one email seemed like it might bring some sort of closure. He hovered over the mouse before finally clicking it open. Richard scanned the email. As he read, a mix of emotions stirred within him: shock, anger, and something else he couldn't quite define, maybe even a hint of admiration. In the email, Kimberly bared her soul, admitting to everything she had tried to hide or brush aside during their marriage. She confessed that she had indeed been involved with another man during their video calls that were meant to be intimate and erotic. She had once seen it as harmless, she explained, just a way to add some excitement to her days. "I told myself it was just a joke, a silly game," she wrote. "I didn't realize how foolish I was or how much it would hurt us. But that wasn't all." Kimberly went on to reveal that after Richard had left, she had sought solace in the arms of the man she'd once considered a friend. She had started dating him, hoping it would ease the pain of losing Richard and the life they had shared. However, the relationship quickly soured. The man she had thought was a friend turned out to be controlling and deceitful. They parted ways soon after, and Kimberly spent the rest of the year trying to rebuild her life. Throughout her letter, Kimberly expressed deep regret, her sadness apparent in every word. Losing Richard had been a painful lesson, one she could not ignore. She had struggled to find a job, learn to live on her own, and faced the consequences of her actions without the safety net of her marriage. "I needed to go through this to learn the things I should have understood long ago," she wrote. "I realize now how much you did for me, how much you sacrificed. I took it all for granted." Towards the end of the email, she asked for his forgiveness, saying, "I don't expect us to pick up where we left off. I just want you to know how truly sorry I am. I now understand what I threw away, and it hurts every day. I am not the same person, Richard." As time passed, Richard had matured, and while there would always be a part of him that regretted how things had ended, he still held out hope that maybe one day they could find a way to be friends again. But if that wasn't possible, he just needed her to understand the truth and one final time asked for his forgiveness. Richard leaned back, rereading the email. It was filled with an honesty he hadn't anticipated, certainly not this level of self-awareness from her. He was struck by how openly she admitted her mistakes, expressing her regret without reservation. For a fleeting moment, he felt a small sense of respect for her ability to face her past and claim the changes she'd made. But even as he recognized this new side of her, deep down he knew there was no going back. Too much had happened and the hurt ran far too deep. For days, Richard wrestled with the decision of whether or not to respond. Part of him wanted to acknowledge her apology and offer the closure she seemed to be searching for. But another part of him felt that silence might speak louder than anything he could say. After several days of reflection, he finally decided to write a response. He knew exactly what he wanted to convey. He'd gone over it in his mind countless times, replaying the pain, the shock, and the disbelief that had overwhelmed him that night, a year ago. If she wanted the truth, he would give her his version of it, raw and unfiltered. He began to type, his fingers moving swiftly over the keys as though the words were speaking themselves. Kimberly, he typed, I received your message and I'm glad you decided to be truthful. But I think you deserve to understand what was going on in my mind that night, the night I came home early. I had just received a promotion and I was excited. I couldn't wait to share that moment with you, to celebrate it with my wife. I wanted to tell you about the future we could finally have, the one we had always dreamed of. A future where we would be comfortable and I could help you find something that would bring you joy as well. But instead, when I walked through that door, it was like stepping into a nightmare. He paused for a moment, letting the emotion rise to the surface. He hadn't allowed himself to fully process that moment until now, but putting it into words seemed necessary. What you called a game felt like nothing short of betrayal, like a slap in the face. It wasn't just a mistake, Kimberly. It was a moment that's been seared into my memory, and even now, I can still see you there, laughing during that call as if nothing mattered to you. It felt like all I had worked for meant nothing to you. He took a deep breath and continued typing, feeling his words gaining strength. When I walked out that night, I knew I was doing the right thing. That certainty has never left me. The past year has proven how much better off I am without the games, the uncertainty, and the humiliation of not knowing what would come next. I'm glad you've acknowledged what went wrong and that you've taken steps to move forward. But for me, the future doesn't involve you. We will never be friends and we will never be a couple again. I have no interest in holding on to what was, nor do I want any reminders of what you did. He typed one final word, goodbye, Kimberly. And please forget about me. Richard signed his name at the bottom of the email and reread it one last time. There was no rush, no anger left in him now. Just a sense of calm, knowing he had said everything he needed to say. He clicked send, leaned back, and felt a weight lift from his chest. In the silence that followed, he realized he had finally let her go.